Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First United Methodist podcast. I am your host, Thomas First, and I will be interviewing people from our congregation so that through great stories, laughter, and tales of the experience of the God who is an active agent in our world, we can get to know one another. Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First podcast. I'm Tom First, the pastor of Memphis First United Methodist, and I'm excited to have my guest Greg Campbell with us today. Greg and his wife Jimmy have been coming to the church for, how long has it been? Has it been 6 months, 7 months?
We started before. Well, we started in November, I believe,
Okay,
November or December. Yeah.
so we're
So
about
it's
10
it's
months.
yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
enjoying every second of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man. Greg and Jimmy have thrown themselves into the congregation. You've probably seen them around there in Sunday school. They led communion this last week before this recording. Greg's a part of my Wednesday lunch crew, so just excited about you guys, man.
Well, thanks. We're glad to be at the church and glad to, as you say, throw ourselves into it. It's not really throwing ourselves. It's a natural progression, really. It
Uh,
feels comfortable, feels like home. So.
how long did you guys look for a church before you settled on ours?
Well, we had been going to Hope Church ever since we met. Jimmy was already a member out there. So when I came along, met her, I started going out there. And then one of our favorite pastors, Eli Morris, decided to retire. And we felt like it was time. We weren't getting as much out of it as we thought we could. So we decided to start looking around. And in actuality, if it weren't for a friend of Jimmy's, Trina Morrison, who is a Methodist pastor, she suggested coming down to First Methodist. And you guys were the first church that we visited. And as soon as we stepped in and heard the sermons and stuff, we knew, okay, we've got to keep coming to this church. So,
That's awesome.
it was easy. It was very easy.
It's not very often that the little urban congregation gets to get the members from the big megachurch congregation. Usually it works the other way around.
Well, actually, coming from that huge mega church to this one, we feel more connected and we feel like we're actually doing something with the church and contributing to the community a lot more than we did. Now Hope's got stuff going on all the time,
Sure.
but you don't feel like you're a part of it as the intimate setting of First Methodist.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a kind of all hands on deck at Memphis First that, we need all the help you can get. And obviously there are seasons that ebb and flow about people's availability, but if you have availability, like we always have some needs. So
Yeah, well,
I'm
we're
grateful
ready.
for you guys throwing yourselves in there. So the question I'd like to start with people is, do you remember the first person who created a memory of God for you in your life? I mean, it can be childhood, it can be good, bad, like whatever, but do you remember what that was?
Well, I'd have to say that it's two people. It's my parents, and it's kind of ironic. My mother was a lifelong member of the Methodist Church.
Okay.
Growing up, she was from Weston, Missouri, which is north of Kansas City. So she was a lifelong Methodist minister. My father, however, was a Baptist that never went. He had served in the Army and was in World War II and fought in the European campaign. And as long as I can remember, he never went to church, whereas my mother went every Sunday. So in my early years, I'd stay home with him while she and my brothers went to church. And then when I was old enough to go and stay still, probably around 5 or 6 years old, I started going to church with my mother. My father would still stay at home, but the combination of both of them, having the church experience and then having the stability and the calmness of my father and his experience in
Mm,
war and his experience in life, the combination of them formed basically a tie to the church, to God. And
wow.
so I think I would have to credit both of them for where I'm at now, I guess.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Are your parents still living?
No, no, both of them are deceased. My father passed away in the 90s, and my mother just 5, 6 years ago. My mother continued to go to church as long as she lived, and my father would occasionally make a showing at church. One of my favorite stories about my father and going to church is that when we were young, we would go to a Methodist church, and it was in Whiteville, which is only about an hour east of here, but it was a very small southern town. And the pastor there at the time, Reverend Everett Porter, this was during the early 70s, I would say, late 60s, early 70s. He preached about segregation,
Hmm.
and he was against segregation, and he proposed that our church invite Black people to church. Let's open the doors.
Uh,
And that in the South immediately stirred controversy,
the rural
divided the
South, no
church.
doubt, no less. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, divided the church. So, as a show of solidarity to the pastor, my father came to church. And so, by him doing that, who everybody in the whole town knew that he didn't go to church and that he wasn't that type of person. But he showed up several Sundays to show solidarity to the pastor and to the idea of allowing Blacks into the church. And so I always think about that because my father taught us at a very early age that you treat everybody with equal values, and you treat everybody like humans no matter what. And so he proved it. He proved it to not only us growing up, but to the Methodist congregation in Whiteville
Huh.
too.
It's interesting to hear that there's a man who didn't really choose to go to church much, but then there's this event, this stance that is taken that compels him to go and support it. And it makes me wonder about, I mean, really since World War II, this decline in male attendance in church. And I wonder if part of it is that a lot of men, maybe rightly, don't feel like the church represents stance, something worth giving their time and energy to.
I think that's a fair equation. You know, my father, like I said, he was raised Baptist, and I can only remember one time him going to a Baptist church, and that was it was for a revival or something, but he just never felt comfortable going to that old conservative Baptist church again. I think that he had learned the lessons of life and religion and spirituality and God in battle, and then just never really felt like that was a church. Now this is an interesting story because we would go to church, he would stay at home, but there by his chair, his easy chair, like Archie Bunker chair, was a Bible, was a huge Bible that he had had for years. And I remember occasionally going home and walking in, and he had the Bible open and had been reading.
Mm.
And so that's how he, I think, connected to God. And obviously, through my mother going to church, I mean, he was very supportive of her going to church and us going to church and participating in everything that was going on in the church. But yet, that was just not his place.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned going to church a lot as a kid. Do you remember like experiencing God or something like, something special when you went to church, or was it kind of a begrudging attendance?
Not begrudging. I think we didn't begrudge it other than the fact that we had to stop watching cartoons on Sunday. But
Right, right.
I always tell the story about I tell Jimmy about this, about when I was probably 11 or 12 years old. The pastor who was having problems with the split in the church decided that he was going to have a revival, and he was going to gather as many of the youth together for a confirmation. And we had this class all week long after school. We would go to this class, and I had no clue whatsoever why I was going to this. I didn't feel the need to go to it, but I went because it was what we all did. My best friend was the pastor's son, but everybody that went to church my age, we all went to the class. Well, there one night at the revival, he called us all up and announced that we had found Jesus and that we were getting. And I
What?
remember distinctively, we had to kneel at the altar, and remembering that I'm going, why am I here? I don't feel anything different. I don't feel anything. And so I think that probably had as big of an effect on me for the rest of my childhood and high school and even college that I wasn't anything special. I always think of myself as a late bloomer, so I didn't really feel God until I would say 15 years ago
Hmm.
when I started going to a 12 step group, Al Anon.
Hmm.
I was in the middle of a divorce and had been suggested to go to Al Anon. And all of a sudden, the words that hit me was that I wasn't in control, that a
Hmm.
higher power was.
Yeah.
And it was like a light went off in my head, and I could relax and realize that I'm not the center of all this, that it's a God. And it really transformed me. I
Hmm.
started really getting into different forms of reading and listening. And one of my favorite devotionals is from Father Richard Rohr. I really liked his books and what he said. I remember one of the passages in the book that he had written. It said that somewhere in the Bible, he said, I'm not sure, but I have been told that 365 times it said, do not fear.
Hmm.
And that struck me. I thought, yeah, I don't have anything to fear because I have this higher power that's in control. I'm certainly not in control. I,
Hmm.
had made a mess of things. So that really struck with me. So I'm kind of a late bloomer to all this. I never had that aha moment, like I said, until about 15 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now that Richard Rohr book is that's Breathing Underwater. Is that what that one is called?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I've heard a lot about that book helping people particularly work their way through the 12 steps.
Yeah. Yeah. It was there. I was begrudging going to a 12 step program. I thought, oh, this is not for me. But the more I went, the more it became my church. And
Yeah.
I mean, I would go several times a week to that and to other groups too, because it's the same concept. It's the same the steps and everything, but you've got a higher power in that, and listening to other people's stories, and they're all different stories and stuff. It also was reassuring to hear how other people had worked through their problems
Yeah.
of whatever it is, if they had a loved one that was in addiction or if they had been in an addiction stuff. So it really struck a chord with me. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like I've heard that a lot from folks who have done different 12-step programs that it becomes a church for them. It occurs to me, at least maybe part of the reason for that is there is a requirement of deep reflection and vulnerability
Yeah.
that in those circles, you're choosing to be there all with a similar thing you're grappling with. Whereas at church, like for whatever reason, culturally in America, it sort of is this place where it seems like people have their crap together, or at least they pretend they do. And
Yeah.
12 steps, like you're kind of going in there saying, like, I don't have control. I'm not in control of anything because I need help.
Yeah.
You were saying that your parents are deceased, but do you have somebody in your life maybe now that you think of as like a spiritual hero or role model that you really look up to?
I've really been thinking about this. I don't think there's any one person, but what
Hmm.
I do is I find that characteristic in other people in other circumstances. And so when I run into somebody that I have not met or that I've met and start talking to them one on one, I can find that kind of characteristic in those people. So it's like spread out. It could be anybody. Mostly it's just people that you would never imagine. But once you hear their story, you get inspired,
Yeah.
and a little piece of each one of those people. It's hard to explain, but yeah, that's I think it's kind of a composite of
Yeah.
just everyday people. I always used to have the argument with one of my brothers about whether people were inherently good or evil, and I always like to think that people were inherently good, but that doesn't keep some people from being what I would see. I've seen the other side too of people just being evil
Sure.
just for evil's sake. But I like to think of most people having good in them. And that's where I get my idea of God is through those people.
That's incredible. And probably maybe why you're attracted to Methodism.
Yeah, yeah,
We have a very strong sense that sin pervades every element of our lives, and yet we also have a very strong belief that the goodness of God and the love of God is being reflected in everything and everyone in creation. And so you can find good in everyone and everything.
yeah. And there are some people that you meet immediately and you can sense that. You've got that sense. And then also people that you meet that you have this sense of, oh, I don't trust them. But I tell you, not to drop celebrity names or anything, but I had the opportunity to meet Stevie Wonder, and I
Mm.
was backstage taking the photographing and stuff. And they said, well, come on into his dressing room. And so I'm in there with maybe four people in his dressing room. He doesn't know I'm in there. And I'm speaking to whoever is his handler, and we're just discussing a few things. And I'm just joking around. And then all of a sudden, he stops and he said, "Who's that? Who's that voice I hear?" And I'm thinking, is he talking to me? And he walks over to me and he holds his hand out, and I touch his hand. And he was the most gracious, spiritual person that I
Wow.
immediately had this feeling of this man is connected with God.
Wow.
He's got a calmness and a sincerity about him. And so I immediately felt that with him. And I felt that with other people, but I just remember that one distinctly because it was a one of those moments that you've got to stop and it gives you chill bumps to think about. And there
Yeah.
are common people that I've had that feeling with too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I've heard people talk about encountering people who, in terms of just looking at them, there was maybe nothing spectacularly beautiful about them or anything, but they're just in awe of them, just encountering
Yeah.
them and being like, something about this person is different. There's a sort of like holy majesty to them or something, like they've been with God.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's other people, and you know from the first time you
Mm-hmm.
meet them that
Mm-hmm.
you want to spend the rest of your life without them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I got a list of those people. So,
Greg, when you imagine God, and of course this is always metaphorical, but when you imagine God, what kind of images come to mind?
well, like I said, I don't think any image, I see kindness in a lot of
Mm.
people. And so when I see something like that, that's what I feel God is. It's not really a face and it's not really
Yeah.
any particular characteristic. I tell you exactly what I'm talking about. So when I was a kid, a small town, after my dad got retired from the army, we moved to Whiteville, and small southern town. And there, my uncle lived in Whiteville, and we would go over to visit, and we'd sit on the front porch in the summertime and stuff. And there was a farmer that lived about a mile down the road, and every day after he would get through with his work, and farmers worked until dusk, and he would drive by in his old pickup truck, and he would have his daughter, who was severely handicapped with cerebral palsy, in the truck with him,
Mm.
and she would have to lean against him in the truck, and they would drive. He would drive her around, and occasionally they would stop and come up to my uncle, and he would have to physically pick her up and bring her on the front porch and stuff. But this man was the sweetest, kindest, gentlest man that you can imagine.
Mm.
But he did that lovingly with his daughter
Yeah.
every day, every
Yeah.
day until she passed away.
Mm.
She passed away, I think, in her 30s. I mean, she lived quite a while. She couldn't communicate, but that didn't matter to him.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think about in the face of God is people like that, people that you don't normally think of being that spiritually good, but they're just good people. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I think about.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about this. You're tapping into something that the majority of evangelical and even mainline churches ignore, which is that there's this sense in like evangelical and mainline churches that like God is just this presence that's sort of like spiritual, and you should experience that as a feeling or an awareness of a spirit or something. But what you're channeling is this idea that comes out of like the Anabaptist tradition, the Mennonite tradition, which says that all that sort of feeling of the Spirit of God is actually secondary to the actual physical experience of God in the people that we meet on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And in particular, that the Spirit of God is uniquely present in the church community when it is living out service to others. And that's what the Spirit of God actually feels like. So,
Yeah.
Greg, you're tapping into some deep Mennonite theology, man. Did you know you had a Mennonite background?
Well, funny that you mention that because Whiteville has a Mennonite community. And early in my career, I decided that I was going to photograph. I was going to ask them if I could come into their community and photograph their church, their schools, and they allowed me to do that.
Wow.
And it was such a sweetness and quietness around them that maybe that stuck with me.
Yeah.
It probably did, but they were really interesting, good people. They really are.
Never met anyone who has encountered Mennonites or Anabaptists and come away unimpressed with them as a
Yeah,
community.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, Greg, in your journey to becoming Mennonite, how does participation in this particular Methodist church help you sort of grow spiritually or be the person that God created you to be?
Oh, well, obvious, walking in and having a church that is so welcoming to everybody that comes into those doors is is refreshing and very different from any church that I've
Yeah,
gone to. And then to see all of the people that take charge of, well, let's do this and let's do that. It's just like, okay, what can I do? I just want to
yeah,
help you guys do whatever you do. So I think that that's the thing that keeps drawing me, and I think Jimmy also, into the church, is that yeah, we just want to join right in because it's such a natural progression of what we want this world to be, is
yeah,
everybody do those chores quietly and with kindness and without show, and
yeah,
that's what keeps drawing me in, at least. So yeah.
yeah. That's incredible, man. Greg, I am grateful for your friendship. I'm grateful for the way that you and Jimmy just keep throwing yourselves in, and I'm looking forward to being a part of the long-term formation for both of us.
Well, I'm so glad and blessed that we finally found our home and ran into you, and grateful for Trina for recommending this, and yeah, we found our home. I'm sure of that.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you, bud.
Well, thank you.